Either we gut education and medical research, or we've got to reform the tax code so that most profitable corporations have to give up tax loopholes that other companies don't get. We can't afford to do both. This is not class warfare. It's math.
Time for the math. That was President Obama today making the argument that deficit reduction legislation should include corporate tax revenue increases. The proposal the president outlined includes $1.5 trillion in new revenue through a combination of allowing the Bush tax cuts to expire for individuals who make more than $200,000 per year and families who make more than $250,000 per year, as well as limiting tax deductions for high-income earners and closing corporate loopholes and tax breaks. The president's proposals provoked a chorus of simple-minded attacks from the Republican presidential candidates relying on slogans, not facts. Mitt Romney released a statement reading, President Obama's plan to raise taxes will have a crushing impact on economic growth. Higher taxes mean fewer jobs. It's that simple. Wrong, Mitt. Michelle Bachmann wrote, Mr. President, you don't create jobs by increasing taxes on job creators. The president's plan to raise taxes on the American people is the wrong policy to create economic growth and jobs. Also wrong. Rick Perry went with, President Obama's plan is a bait and switch that offers more than $1 trillion in higher taxes for a promise of temporary tax relief. The president penalizes investment when it is needed most, discourages charitable giving, and doubles down on a failed government stimulus strategy. Okay, Rick Perry gets half a point on discourages charitable giving, but he's wrong on everything else. Today, the president argued that his proposed tax revenue increases would grow the economy.
All I'm saying is that those who have done well, including me, should pay our fair share in taxes to contribute to the nation that made our success possible. And I think most wealthy Americans would agree if they knew this would help us grow the economy and deal with the debt that threatens our future.
Joining me now, Washington Post columnist and MSNBC contributor Ezra Klein. Thanks for joining me tonight, Ezra.
Good evening.
All right, you brought your pencil and paper. We're ready to do the math here.
All right.
It is a marvel to me that after the 1990s, which in effect the raging economy of the 1990s began with a Bill Clinton tax increase, what was then the highest tax increase in history, still is the highest tax increase in history. The rate stayed that way for the entire decade, and we're still stuck in this discussion that Republicans want to cling to the notion that those Clinton tax rates would be disastrous for job creation.
It has not seemed to be a discussion particularly amenable to evidence. But let's try some anyway. My understanding here is we've got a graph from the Center for American Progress that I brought along tonight. And what you'll see on it is they did something interesting. They looked at job creation over periods of time which had different top marginal tax rates, so different top tax rates for the people Republicans would call the job creators. And what they found, I think, is essentially destroys this argument. The best years for job creation in this country actually had the highest marginal tax rates. If you look at the 5 best years since 1950, you'll find they all had tax rates above 70% at the highest marginal rate.
Yeah, that highest bar there is in the 75 to 80% top tax bracket. That's when you really saw job creation just roaring along.
And that little tiny red line, the little itty-bitty one with no job creation, that's where we are now. Very, very low top marginal tax rate, very, very low job creation. And now I don't want to go too far. I think it is important to say that we don't want extremely high marginal tax rates. They do discourage work. We don't think taxes are in general a great thing for the economy, but nor for that matter are spending cuts to things like unemployment insurance. What we tend to find is that taxes simply are not the driving factor behind the economy. Republicans have a tendency to make taxes seem monocausal. The economy is a simple formula, and on one end of the formula is taxes, and when they're low, the other end of the formula does well, and when they're high, it does poorly. That simply is not true.
And these are, by the way, that list that we saw was a list of the actual legislated tax rates at the time, the reality was that no one was actually paying those top rates. Their reality was, even when the rate was 90%, people were in effect paying around 50%, which is still much, much, much higher than now. And it had absolutely no negative impact on job creation. Where do we go from here in this debate, Ezra? I was surprised Republicans today really didn't come up with any specificity other than Rick Perry. I got to give him credit. He noticed that there was a limitation on deductibility proposed by the president, so that would include deductibility for charitable giving. If you gave, $1 million to some charity, you would not get a 35% tax deduction on it. You'd get a 28% tax deduction on it, and that may inhibit some charitable giving around the edges. That's possible. Other than that, there wasn't a word of specificity in their responses.
No, not a ton of it. And the irony of this conversation is the Republicans are going to push it down in the wrong direction. If you talk to a Republican economist, if you talk to Glenn Hubbard, who is advising Mitt Romney, what he'll tell you is that the real types of taxes you got to worry about are marginal rate taxes. You don't want to raise marginal rates. They discourage work. He'll also tell you it's not a bad thing to clean out expenditures and loopholes from the code, things like the itemized deduction that Perry is talking about, things like all the many, many deductions we spend trillions of dollars on every year. But the part of the tax, the type of tax increase that is popular is increasing marginal tax rates on the rich. A type that is unpopular is going after deductions, which, as my colleague Gloria Montgomery pointed out in this weekend's Washington Post, actually tend to benefit a lot of middle-class households. So Republicans are going to end up getting the exact type of tax increase that they like least, and that has the best argument for being economically damaging, and they're going to be able to block the type of tax increases that we should actually be doing, which would create a broader, flatter code and encourage economic growth more aggressively.
The Washington Post, Ezra Klein, thank you very much for joining me tonight, Ezra.
Thank you.